Hello, Ashen One. Come, take a seat by the fire and feel the small flecks of embers as they begin to dance and parade on your skin. Bathe in the radiant light of the bonfire and watch as the snowy ash begins to cover the ground around you. Fall into the gray world as your own soul slowly burns down to nothing but a pile of ash. There to serve as a memory of what once was. Welcome to Soul Searching for Dark Souls 3. Today we'll be covering the final entry in the Numbered Souls series and laying it to rest. If you've not seen the first two episodes, I will link them down below. This is the show where I examine what life lessons a game or series may have taught me or heavily reinforced for me personally. I will then compare it with the goals the developers had in mind when creating the game, and whether their vision was able to shine through or remained an ash-covered silhouette of their ideas. Now, as I've already mentioned, this is Dark Souls 3, but weirdly enough, this was the first one I actually played all the way through to completion. Now, it was released in 2016 with a lot of hype and expectations surrounding it. I wasn't aware of most of it, to be honest, and I only knew the game was releasing because Chris and John were talking about it one day at work. Now, as I'm sure you already know, I had some passing knowledge of the franchise, so I listened in and engaged on a relatively shallow level where I could, because I wanted some form of kind of connection and, belonging with these guys who were very quickly becoming some of my best friends. We were slowly becoming friends at that time, and this really marked the second summer when we were working together, and we all decided we would play the game together when it came out. Naturally, John also did some solo series and videos of the game before we started playing together, as he does with any new Soulsborne games that come out, except for Sekiro and Bloodborne. He will absolutely consume them. I will link to some, but not all of the videos down below because he's done a lot of them. So I will probably just leave a link to his channel down below. I will admit I was hesitant because I knew I had never seriously played one of these games, and the thought was daunting, as the only experience I had to go off of was what little I had played of number 1. Despite that, I pushed on, took up a controller for our first playthrough. And after that came 3 more playthroughs with the guys, and surprisingly 1 solo playthrough, which I really wasn't expecting. Top it all off with a all achievements run that I did with John, and I finished this game 6 times in total, which is very rare for me, and most of those do include the DLC. Thus far, so as of recording this, I have 225.4 hours in the game, and right now, no intentions to go back to it. This is genuinely one of the longest amounts of time I've ever put into a single player game in general that's not, an MMO base, or like that isn't kind of centered around that MMO playstyle. So this was really weird for me to see just such a high number. And it is the most played Soulsborne game that I have in my Steam library. Yes, that does include Elden Ring. Now, I did want to throw in a quick warning that if you go back and watch the first few series today, they are both cringe and my audio is ear-splitting because I was using a very cheap headset mic at the time. It also came out almost 10 years ago, which I want to die when I think about that. So I was a much cringier 19-year-old. God, to think of a time when I wasn't in my 20s feels like an eternity ago. It's not fun. So I am going to pull away slightly from my usual style of talking about what I learned in each playthrough, because I don't feel like that's really the right direction I want to go with the series, and just kind of mention, when I did particular playthroughs and just what I learned in general, or kind of what was reinforced for me. So the first one we started with was on August 10th, 2016, which is insane to me. Now, as I sit here and record this, I am in 2024. You'll be viewing this most likely in 2024. So that was almost 8 years ago, a couple months off to the day, which is nuts to me. Because I still remember the feeling that I had when I started this game. I had no idea what I was doing. I had no idea if I was going to enjoy the game. And I was only playing it because Chris and John wanted to. And we were able to find some sort of, common ground, if you want to call it that, in playing this game. Because we'd played Overwatch, we'd done a few things, and John and Chris really wanted to do Dark Souls. And I was like, yeah, sure, whatever. I hadn't really given the series the time of day before this. And I have to say, that first playthrough was eye-opening in a lot of regards. Before that, I was always the guy who would just play a game on easy just to kind of try to breeze through it. You know, I liked collectibles, I liked the journey and that sort of stuff, but I was never in it for the challenge of a game. I was never trying to get, you know, the S rank in Devil May Cry. I was never trying to beat the very hard difficulties in any game because I didn't want to put in the effort. I didn't want to deal with it. But, you know, Dark Souls doesn't have that option. There are no difficulty settings with this game, so it was either get good or get dead. And I very quickly got dead. And then I, over time, sort of got good. But I have to say, this being my first real foray, my first real experience with the series, kind of cemented this idea in my mind that I don't often enjoy these games unless it's with friends. Now, as I say, I have done a solo run of this game and a solo run of Dark Souls 1 much later, but I didn't enjoy them as much as when I was playing with friends. Like, to me, this is very much a communal experience. This is meant to be enjoyed with other people and just give you that shared experience with someone else. Now, I admittedly did do a solo playthrough more to prove to myself than anything that I could do it, that I could get by without the help from friends, and that, you know, I'm not absolutely horrible at video games. But it was still interesting, especially again that first time, because for me, this was really my first experience in gaming with friends online, gaming with friends where they're not in the same room as me, or I can't look at them if they've done something to piss me off and just like, you know, express my emotion through a facial contortion. I have to verbally say something, and that didn't always come out right. Before this, you know, I'd played Army of Two, Gears of War, Ghost Recon Future Soldier. Man, that was a bad game. But I loved those games because I was able to sit down with a friend in the room, you know, on the couch or on the floor or whatever, and just play together. It was a very, again, communal experience for me. And that's part of the reason I grew to love video games, is that it became that communal experience. It became that community that I could be involved with, that didn't feel exclusive or overwhelming. And admittedly, I did my fair share of gatekeeping, which was not right, but I learned to stop that kind of stuff. But anyway, so this was genuinely one of the first times I had, you know, used Discord and played with friends at the same time, which I get sounds really stupid. But for me, it was a learning experience to try to more effectively communicate verbally when I wasn't able to do so physically. Now, obviously, most of you who are subscribed don't know me in real life. I very much talk with my hands. I very much talk with facial expressions, and I like to talk. Everyone I know will tell you that. I don't shut up. But to take away those visual elements for me is hard because, again, I express myself a lot through my physical movements, and I'm not able to do that over Discord. I'm not able to do that when I'm talking to the guys and trying to communicate with them. So I had to be a lot more careful with my words, in the sense that I had to be a lot more specific with what words I used. And these are the intricacies of online communication we don't think about. Like, I'm not big on social media. I don't post on Instagram or Twitter nearly as much as I should if I really want to grow this channel. And I don't really text a lot of people. Like, I'll text some friends occasionally, but I find even that to be difficult because, again, I don't have that physical layer of communication. Now, I've gotten a lot better about it, but it was a very new experience for me, genuinely, at the time, to go through this and have to communicate purely verbally and just express my feelings. And listen, as a 19-year-old, I was just dumb. I was just stupid. I was saying stupid stuff to be edgy, and it hurts to go back and watch it. But I also learned that I don't have to play a game on easy. I don't have to take the easiest road just because it's available. There are times when I'll play on normal, or hell, sometimes even hard for certain games because I want that little bit of a challenge. But I will say one of the biggest changes I have made since starting this game, or playing this game rather, is that I play most games on normal difficulty, which I know sounds completely ridiculous, but it's more, I genuinely believe I can do it now that I've, you know, committed to bashing my head against a wall a million times to see what happens and finally make that crack, finally get through and beat bosses, beat challenges that were really standing in my way that I maybe didn't want to face before. I won't say it like changed my whole outlook on life, because it didn't. That would be ridiculous. It is at the end of the day a video game. But it did genuinely change the way I approach other video games and the medium as a whole, in making myself believe that I can do this, that I don't have to just go the easiest route all the time. Sometimes I'll still play on easy just because, life gets stressful, especially nowadays, and I want that easier experience, but I don't do it because I don't feel like I can't do it. Dark Souls gave me genuine confidence when it came to other video games, because I had to get good. I had to be able to do it on my own. Dark Souls 3 with friends came out, the first episode came out on January 30th, 2018, so little over about a year and a half-ish. This was an interesting one for me, because normally I don't go back to games once I've beaten them. I've expressed this many times on the podcast. Like for me, when I beat a game, especially when I get all achievements, that is my end point. That is where I stop. That is where I say, okay, I'm done with this game. And especially something like Dark Souls, where, it feels like once you've seen everything, once you've fought the bosses, that's kind of it. I never really experimented with different builds and different ideas until this series, because I was always the traditional sword and board. When you go back and if you go back and watch the first playthrough, same thing. Knight, sword and shield, blocking, defensive playstyle. I switched up a little bit in the Dark Souls 3 with friends, because I started getting more comfortable with that experimentation, with understanding what else is out there. And I think Dark Souls 3 became this kind of comfort zone for me to explore other avenues, explore areas that I was maybe hesitant to before, because I felt like I could do it. Again, it's that growing confidence and that growing sense of, hey, if I'm comfortable with this, why not try this other thing? And then why not keep experimenting? Now, admittedly, that eventually led into the stupid weeb weapons that Chris and I used in the Ashes of Ariandel DLC that we very quickly realized were absolutely awful. But I would never have had the confidence to try something that's stupid without growing as a person, or rather growing as a gamer. Can't believe I just said that. Through this game, through what I learned from playing Dark Souls the first time and then the second time. I was around this time that I did a solo playthrough. I don't exactly remember when this was, especially because I had to switch hard drives a few times, so I technically lost that character. But it was definitely between the second and third playthroughs that I did with the guys. And again, this very much was me trying to prove to myself that I could do it. Me trying to say that my skills have grown, my confidence has grown. Prove to myself that I can do this. Like genuinely look in the mirror, say you can do this, and then actually do it. Like actually follow through with that. And so this was a big one for me, because it was more, again, moving out of that comfort zone, but still kind of in a comfortable game. Dark Souls 3 very much became comfort food for me. I don't think I'll go back to it anytime soon, but it served its purpose. It did all that I could have asked it to and more. And that it gave me confidence to try other things, to do other things. Again, mostly around the gaming sphere, but I'm not going to lie, it did give me a little bit of a confidence boost in real life, just knowing that I could get through something challenging when I have an infinite number of retries, which in life you don't get an infinite number of retries, and I get that. But if you approach something with the mindset of you failed once, you can never do it, you're going to fail 9 times out of 10 and you're not going to retry. If you approach it with the mindset of, hey, I failed this, and sure, you don't get a retry with everything, but with a lot of things you do, and you just don't realize it. You don't want to look at it that way. You think, I failed once, there's no going back, I can't fix it. Half the time you can. Half the time you can go back, retry, get better at something. Don't let that initial failure get in your way. Didn't learn all this from a video game, but it certainly helped to reinforce it when I put myself through that kind of stuff. Finally, we come to June 18th of 2019, where we did the all bosses playthrough. This one was interesting for me because, again, this was proving to myself, and all of us proving to ourselves, that we could do it, especially around the Midir fight. I maintain to this day the Midir fight is one of the, not necessarily worst boss fights in the Souls series, but it's one of the most annoying boss fights because of the number of attacks that can just one-shot you. It feels insane to try to be able to dodge everything. And I didn't feel that sense of, reward and accomplishment for beating Madeira at the end, I just thought, oh, thank God it's over. And Dark Souls 3 has some fantastic bosses, has some, more mediocre bosses, but this was the only one to me that felt not bad, but didn't feel good when I finally won. It just felt like a relief, like this exhausting task, this daunting, ridiculous feat is over and I can rest. I can be done with it. But again, this was that growing level of confidence, that growing level of I need to prove to myself that I can do this so that I can move on, so that I can feel better. And after a lot of tries, a lot of deaths, we did it, which was fantastic. It felt great at the end of the day to be able to say, I have beaten every boss in Dark Souls 3, because that's not something everyone can say. And I'm not trying to be like, oh, I'm so good. I'm an absolute garbage at most video games, Dark Souls 3 included. But I can say that I did something because I kept trying. I didn't give up halfway through. And I was finally able to push through that wall with the help of my friends. That then brings us to May 4th with our RP playthrough. Now this was a fun one because this was one that I didn't really have planned out all that well. And I mean, we don't usually plan a series unless we have like a gimmick or something that we want to do around it. And the RP playthrough was one that we'd been looking at for a little while because we wanted to jump back into Dark Souls 3, but we had no idea, what we wanted to do in the game, in the space, to try to differentiate it from just a regular playthrough. And admittedly, I was the biggest barrier to that because I wanted to do something new. I didn't want to just do another playthrough of Dark Souls 3. It was a lot of fun to try out this very different build that I was not used to for the sake of, being an invader, for the sake of being a boss. And Artorias was fantastic. I love Artorias to bits. Yes, I'm one of those basic ones who just, can't get over Artorias. But it was great to experience that. It was great to be able to again, push myself slightly out of that comfort zone. Even if I'm, right out of the box, but then, pushed up against the wall, it still felt really fun to do it. And then we got to our Invader RP playthrough, which was also a lot of fun because it was one of those things where it felt different enough from the boss RP run, but still felt familiar. It still felt like something I was used to. And I know I'm putting way too much stock in a video game. I totally understand that. And every one of these videos puts way too much stock into a video game. But for me, this became something of a comforting place for me to just come back to when I felt like it. I could leave for a while and then come back with Chris and John, enjoy another jaunt through very familiar territory, but in a different way, but never so different that it felt like a whole new experience, because I didn't want a new experience. I don't want a new experience with a Souls game. I want the same thing that I've been doing for years at this point, but slightly different, slightly altered. And I found in Dark Souls 3 a comfort that I have not found with any of the other Souls games, especially something like, Elden Ring, which is just so massive, so big, but I don't find myself wanting to go back and experience it with a new build because there's too much of it. There's so much to do that it becomes overwhelming and intimidating. Whereas Dark Souls 3 doesn't suffer from that issue. Dark Souls 3 is just enough for me to enjoy it and want to do it again, but slightly differently. Which brings me to my final playthrough of Dark Souls 3. The one that I was willing to say goodbye to the game with. And it's kind of funny because I'm not going to lie, I started going for all achievements. I started this journey of, kind of completion, as it were, when my stepdad got re-diagnosed with cancer, because I wanted some semblance of finality, of completion, of feeling like I achieved something. And I get it, a video game is not the place to feel like you've achieved something. You need to work on that in real life. But at the time, I didn't have the mental capacity to be able to handle that. There was just a lot going on in life, and video games has always been where I've turned to de-stress, to find that comfort. And I wanted to, again, do something that I felt like mattered to me, or, that I could say, hey, I did this. I achieved something. I was able to actually do something. And I didn't want to do that alone. I didn't want to do that without at least inviting Chris and John along for the ride. Now, admittedly, Chris was not down, which is fine. I didn't think he would be. John, thankfully, was. I would have done it even if he wasn't, but him being there made a massive difference in just the entire undertaking, not just because it made it so much easier, but because I was able to, again, share in that experience with someone else. It wasn't just me doing something for me, it was me doing something for me, but also being able to do something with and for, to some degree, someone else. And so John and I, in 2020, in the beginning throes of COVID, we decided to go for all achievements, and after a while, we got there. I think, it might have been 2021. I can't remember. I'd have to ask John, but I'm too lazy for that. So, in either 2020 or 2021, it was definitely during COVID, but before the servers got shut down, we went for all achievements, and we eventually got there. It was a hell of a journey. Did talk about it on the podcast. I will have that linked in the description down below. So be sure to check it out if you're at all interested. But it was my way of saying goodbye. It was my way of saying thank you to Dark Souls 3. It has served its purpose, and now it was done. I didn't need it anymore. I'm in a much better place, I think, physically, mentally, than I was when I first started that journey. And I owe part of that to Dark Souls 3 because it did help me get through some more stressful events, and I was able to eventually move on from the comfort it gave me to find comfort in other things. I was able to say, thank you for all the time you've given me. Thank you for all the time that I've spent with you. It's time for me to go. And in Dark Souls 3, again, I found a comfort that I have not found with a lot of other games, nor have I found it with any of the other numbered Soul series. So it holds a very special place in my heart. I think it always will, but I don't think I will ever go back to it, and I'm okay with that. So I hope, if you made it to the end of the video, thank you very much. I get it, it was long, rambly, very disorganized, but it felt nice to say it all. So if you've made it this far, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, the typical YouTube stuff. I should probably throw that in somewhere earlier. I might do that, we'll find out. And I hope you're able to find something that brings you the same comfort that Dark Souls 3 brought me, whether it's a JRPG, whether it's a CRPG, whether it's a strategy game, maybe it's a mobile game, whatever, as the old expression goes, whatever floats your boat, whatever you find that comforts you, don't let someone else take that from you. Don't let someone else say that that's not okay or that's not right. If it brings you comfort, if it helps you get you through a rough time in life or whatever you need it to, appreciate that it happened. Understand that it may not be there forever. It might be, who knows? It's a video game. It technically isn't going anywhere if you keep it installed in your system. If you don't, there's the whole copyright issue and licensing thing. Anyway, that's a whole nother discussion. But as the other old expression goes, don't cry that it's over, smile that it happened. And that's how I kind of have to approach Dark Souls 3. I'm more than overjoyed that I had it. It brought me immense comfort. It brought me immense joy for, over 200 hours, which to me is bananas. But I've had my time with it. I've enjoyed my time with it, and I am done with the game. So, real quick, I should probably get into what the developers had in mind for this game. So I wanted to take a quick look and see what, FromSoft's and Bandai Namco's intentions were with Dark Souls 3. Now, obviously, this is the third numbered entry, but kind of technically fifth entry in the Soulsborne franchise, given that it does, rather, would at this time include Bloodborne.
And all of their games have been fantastic, except for maybe Dark Souls 2, but I've already talked that one to death, so I'm not going to, rag on it here. Interestingly enough, this game did start out without Miyazaki. So in the original intention, it started development without Miyazaki being the game director, because he was at the time working on Bloodborne, which was developed between 2012 and 2015. For context, Dark Souls 2 was being developed between 2011 and 2014, and Dark Souls 3 had entered pre-production in 2013, or maybe full production, I'm not 100% sure. So at the time that this project started, much like Dark Souls 2, he was not involved with it. He was not directing or taking control of anything at that time, given his focus was on Bloodborne. But he was kind of pulled in later, when Bloodborne was in its finishing stages and Dark Souls 3 was really in its prototype stages, to say, hey, listen, Dark Souls 2 didn't go the way we wanted it to. We want you to take over. Now, at the time, he was not the head of From Software as a whole. He was just the Dark Souls guy, the head of the Souls series. So he was told, hey, we need you to take over. And interestingly enough, he brought a lot of unexpected ideas to this, and I will link all of my sources down below. He didn't want to create a full-on end to the franchise. He didn't want to create this, open and close case of everything's done, there's nothing else I can do. He wanted it to feel like a conclusion to a trilogy, like to the Souls series, but he didn't want it to be so closed, so cordoned off that he couldn't come back to it later on if he so chooses to. Now, at the time of this recording in, February of 2024, he has not done so, though I do hope one day, give it 5-10 years, that he does come back to this franchise. With that in mind, he did state that he wanted this really huge finale to be the linking of the first flame that was kind of, really hinted at in Dark Souls 1. And he wanted to carry on this saga of the Firekeepers and the work that they've been doing, because we did have one in each numbered Souls game. And he wanted that to finally come to an end, whether it be Linking of the Fire, whether it be the Age of Dark, have that chapter end, even if the book keeps going. He also said that he doesn't create the game with story in mind. He creates the gameplay and then afterwards kind of lets the story and the plot and everything else unfold according to the gameplay, which I thought was really fascinating. And one thing I wanted to point out that really interested me, because it was kind of funny, apparently one of the complaints he'd heard from fans is that they don't want the characters to be ugly. Sorry, quote, ugly. So he decided to add a new state where you are embered, empowering you. Hollowing is still in the game, and he personally likes it, how it's more kind of one of the pillars of the storyline, but when you're, obviously not embered, you're not as ugly, which I thought was hilarious, because I personally also hate, looking like a piece of human jerky, but I didn't mind it so much to the point where I wanted it to be, super changed in the game. And I just thought it was really funny that one of the kind of, not necessarily major gameplay changes, but one of the more significant gameplay changes came about because players didn't want to be, quote, ugly. Now, I hated the system in Dark Souls 2 and how it worked, because it felt just like punishing you when you already weren't doing well. You were just being kicked while you were down. But this was really, really welcome. On the note of difficulty, because I did talk about how this was, my first foray into the franchise, he didn't want it to be super punishing. He wanted it to be challenging, but a type of challenging that you could still overcome, that you could still get past without breaking controller. Now, there are plenty of people who have broken a controller because of Dark Souls 3. There's plenty of, video evidence out there, but I can understand his perspective, and I do feel that he accomplished that in the sense that Dark Souls 3 controls the smoothest out of the numbered Souls titles because it's the most modern, and it feels like it was designed to be less frustrating. Not that the old ones were necessarily designed specifically to be frustrating, but the design has been streamlined, has been figured out over the course of doing these other games. And, it's been really kind of figured out, how do we make this work? Dark Souls 2, especially when it pulled away from the original Dark Souls 1 template, I'm sure rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. It rubbed me the wrong way. But they really did figure it out with Dark Souls 3, which I think was fantastic. And I think it's kind of ironic in the sense that, for me, and I'm sure a lot of other people, this, quote, conclusion or like end of the chapter was their first time, was my first time into this series. And I do think it's one of the more, welcoming Souls-likes in terms of From Software games themselves. And I have to admit, the story didn't hit as hard as a conclusion because I hadn't played the other games. So I do feel like, having played all the other games and then come back to Dark Souls 3, it is a great conclusion, it's a great send-off to the series for now. But I can't say it had the full impact of what the developers were hoping for because I wasn't the intended audience, in the sense that, again, this was my first real time playing the game. This was not something that I had been experiencing and growing with over time. I jumped in at the end, which I kind of hate myself for, but at the same time, I did what I had to do in terms of, breaking into the series with one of the more accessible titles, so then I could go back to the less accessible titles and kind of work my way backwards. But that's a whole conversation for another video that I'll probably never make. So yeah, fun times. I also found this quote really interesting, that the game's visual focused on, quote, withered beauty, which I thought was just really beautiful because I get it. The ember, the ashes scattered throughout the game's world, and just this feeling of a dying world that needs its fire reignited, that needs to be brought back from the brink. And it's not necessarily a pretty game. It's very graphically detailed, but if a lot of the areas, are grays and browns, but I do think some of the areas are really beautiful, if not pretty. And I know that doesn't make a lot of sense, but bear with me here. Like, they're not necessarily nice to look at, but from an artistic standpoint, they represent an interesting sense of beauty. And I get it, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. I don't think these are very pretty to look. I'm sure someone else does, but I can understand what they're trying to achieve by saying withered beauty, by portraying this idea of a dying world that still holds that beautiful spark, that beautiful flame just underneath the surface, waiting to be reignited. Now, I've bashed on Dark Souls 2 a fair bit in my videos and in, just in general. But I do want to point out that Imasu Okano and Yui Tanemura were co-directors with Miyazaki, helping him in many ways to, delegate some aspects of work, such as multiplayer-related issues and updates, in terms of working on Dark Souls 3. So some of the people who were working and directing Dark Souls 2 were brought back to help out with Dark Souls 3, which I think has definitely demonstrated they have fantastic abilities when they have a solid core direction. And I think that's great. I think they've redeemed themselves. And overall, I think the developers absolutely hit what they were going for. They wanted this to feel like a conclusion and, just kind of a closing of the chapter, to be able to, open it up again later on, but not for a long time. They wanted to explore other things like Sekiro, like Armored Core, like Elden Ring, which I'll be doing videos on most of those. I don't think I'll do one on Armored Core. Mechs aren't really my thing. And I could feel this weight when I went back to it after playing some of the other games. And Miyazaki said that himself, that he felt sad ending the Soul series. This was part of his life's work, but he just doesn't want to work on Dark Souls anymore. He's gotten what he wanted to from it, but he wants to experience new things, do new things. And I think he's absolutely done a fantastic job since Dark Souls 3 of doing that. And I feel like this was a fantastic note to send the series out on for now. So with all that being said, thank you, ladies, gentlemen, everyone in between and beyond, for watching, for being here, for listening to my stupid voice ramble on about all of these things. And thank you to From Software. I've talked at length about how your games have helped me deal with stressful situations, give me a comfort zone, give me a manageable challenge, which I do feel like everyone needs in life. And yes, I get it, it's a video game, but everyone has to start somewhere. And if this is your starting point, go for it. Don't let anyone tell you, oh, that's stupid, how could you learn from a video game? Don't let anyone tell you that a video game is a waste of time. Because as the back of the DVD case for the movie Speed, which is a classic, says, time you enjoyed wasting is never wasted time. Which is super, philosophical and deep and really stupid on some levels, but it holds so much truth to it. If you enjoyed wasting time with this game like I did, wasting hundreds of hours like I did, and if it helped you, you didn't waste anything. You gained something. You gained a sense of self-confidence. You gained a sense of joy. You gained the ability to get through whatever garbage, stressful day you were having. And I hope everyone's able to find that for themselves. So please let me know down in the comments below, what's your, comfort game? What is your nice, relaxing place to come back to in regards to video games or even in regards to real life? Let's talk about it. I think it's important to have these kinds of conversations around mental health and just where you feel safe, where you feel like you can relax. What is your comfort zone? Let's talk about that and so much more down in the comments below. Thank you once again, everyone, for being here. I do plan on making a few more of these soul-searching videos, both within and without the kind of From Software scope. So please look forward to that. Hopefully I don't burn out on these. We'll figure it out. Anyway, I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.